we're living in an age of like very cheap, very good hardware.
Yeah.
And then free open source software that you can just pair up, and it's pretty amazing.
So would you say now is the time to get in this kind of space with AI and all these kinds of things, since it is becoming more open source? And
like now, and I think it's going to get easier and easier as we go into the future.
Yeah. Welcome to the Brew. Today I am joined by the co-founders of ARKS. We got Oscar and Xavier Hernandez.
Hey.
And to get this show started, might as well explain what is ARKS.
Yeah, let's do it. Let me take it away, or you want to take it away?
Well, first of all, thanks for having us.
Thanks for
Of course.
Take it away.
So ARKS is a autonomous mobile robot company, but we're really not as much focused on the technology as we are on the business logistics side.
Yep.
So what we actually are a logistics efficiency company.
Okay.
So what we do is basically, we found out there was a huge problem in logistics right now. Everyone's buying online, right? The older generation doesn't do it as much. We kind of were part of the transition where we got to see how you start ordering online, but everyone after us is like, that's the only way you're gonna buy. Why would you go to the store?
Mm-hmm.
And so as more people buy online, you have every time someone buys online, you have someone in a warehouse going to get the item from the shelf or the rack, and then walk it to the packaging station, package, ship it, and then send it out.
Mm-hmm.
So you have more and more of these online purchases and more of these people that you need to make those purchases and happen. And what we realized, what we hit on not too long ago, was that there is way more purchases. There's more demand for warehousing now, and it's only growing. Yeah. But we're kind of running out of people to hire.
Yeah.
Just last year, there was 173,000 warehouse pickers that the American warehouse and fulfillment center market wanted,
mm-hmm.
that they just couldn't find.
Yep. Which
is extraordinary, because that's $30,000 annual income. Mm-hmm. per pop per times 173,000. It's $3 to $4 billion.
Yeah, that's just on the table.
That's on the table that we just don't have enough workers.
Yeah.
So the problem we're trying to fix is, all right, well, how do we help the fulfillment centers keep up with their fulfillment rate, to keep up with e-commerce in a way that, they're realistic about how much they can depend on a growing workforce. Like, they can't depend on a growing workforce anymore. So how do we help them increase their fulfillment rate enough to keep up with e-commerce?
Okay.
So that's the problem we're trying to solve.
Yeah, and since right now it seems a lot of them spend most of their time walking.
Yeah.
We just make a robot that does the walking for them. Mm-hmm. Just rolls back and forth in a smart way, in the way that they need it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's an actual really interesting point you just brought up, is that a lot of times we have a conversation about unemployment rates.
Yeah.
Unemployment rate, obviously, in the United States right now is extremely low, which is a good and a bad thing, because a lot of the data is kind of skewed in the way because it's talking about employment, but not necessarily how much money you're making out of the jobs.
Right.
But at the same time, it blows my mind to think that there's 173,000 jobs available right now in the market that is needed, like necessarily needed in these companies.
And that's just warehouse pickers.
Yeah, that's just warehouse pickers.
Just
and because the question usually comes with technology, and especially automation, it is a very scary subject matter, because it is going to displace a lot of jobs.
Yeah,
it really will, especially in retail stores in general.
Yeah.
It's going to really take away jobs, which is one thing why universal basic income is the thing in these conversations. But the other side of the equation, what a lot of people don't think about, is a human can only do a certain amount of tasks, and then they're only efficient to a certain extent.
Right.
Robotics, if it's to benefit the worker as a tool, is huge.
Yeah.
But when it replaces, I think that's where the problem is. But if it's used as a tool, I think that's where it's here to benefit society, not necessarily impact it.
And that's cool, because that's the culture of new age robotics. Whereas a couple years back, there was a trauma in with manufacturing companies taking on automation, because older automation companies promised them the world of substituting all this labor, being able to do all the work themselves, and then they ended up executing on poor products that didn't have a ROI, and so you had a lot of manufacturing companies get traumatized by these promises that they've made. Mm-hmm. But with new age automation, I feel like the companies are a lot more aware that a company's greatest asset is its workforce.
Yeah.
And what we should be aiming to do is not replace the workforce. What we should be aiming to do is augmenting them, making their jobs easier and faster to do, so that we can get more goods, basically, being delivered faster and cheaper for everyone else that purchases them.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing to consider, though, And I think this is one thing that as ARKS later down the line, not necessarily at this point where you're at, but you have to consider is the sustainability side as well. When it comes to how supply chain logistics and how it's evolving and how quickly, like one-day shipping, and how that really impacts, for example, climate change and all these issues, because the amount of packages that are now getting pushed out, the amount of carbon footprint that's created with the boxes and all these things. So I think efficiency is good, but I think the one thing that also needs to be thought about is how do we make it more sustainable process from the start to the finish? How do we reduce the carbon footprint? How do we reduce how fast it, like if the speed's fine, but what is the repercussions of that? And I think that's one thing that has to be explored when it comes to the supply chain world in general.
Yeah, and I don't think that for later down the line, I think, you know, we have these conversations from the beginning, because we need to know how we're gonna move towards that new age. So luckily, like we grew up in an age where, you know, we grew up in the recession. And I think there was a shift from the older generation to our generation, where the older generation is like, okay, let's make a business to make profit and just have a better lifestyle, make money. And our generation of entrepreneurs is more like, okay, well, let's make a lot of money to work on bigger projects that will help impact the world. So it's nice to be part of that, and be able to worry about, you know, the environment, because that's a privilege that we have just because, you know, we're raised in the right time, and that we can impact that. That's definitely. Do
you have anything else to add to that, Oscar?
I mean, so like we're already making small decisions here and there. But like one thing that we're conscious of is that, like, since we have a robot, we need a lot of electricity. But like our engineers have definitely talked about like ways of repurposing the electricity that we're already using, or like ways of recharging our batteries without having to plug it into the wall.
Yeah, I mean, just small things like that. And I think that's actually a very important distinction you just brought up there. Younger entrepreneurs are really thinking about the social impact. They really are. Like even the solutions that we were trying to do with Free Logic Media when we're working with businesses is we're really thinking about how can we create CSR programs that are legitimate, like they actually really care about how we're giving back to society, as well as how do we reduce carbon footprint from all the activities that these businesses are doing. Because at the end of the day, younger entrepreneurs, we still want money. Like let's get this right. Like we still want money.
We're gonna get rich.
Exactly. But we care about how we do it. We have the dilemma of we still want to make more sustainable processes. We want to make all these things, but I think the benefit of that is that that's actually making better companies that are actually more competitively, have a better competitive advantage, that actually can succeed in a market.
And it's a funner game to play.
It is.
Like I think I'm not gonna say anyone can make money, because that's not true, right? And anyone can make money, but it's such a better game to play to say, I'm gonna make a lot of money and I'm gonna make a huge impact on the world in a way that matters and, you know, progresses towards a better future.
Yeah, and that actually makes you
that's way more exciting.
Exactly. It makes you want to get up and like do what you want to do. To kind of go back into the automation and the development of it, where do you think AI has gone to when it comes to supply chain logistics world? Like, do you think that AI has gone to the point that it really is this really efficient system? Because you did bring up like how the industry was scarred, right? Because
it was scarred
with the promises that automation could do. Do you think that automation now has the behind the scenes, it has enough of the back end systems and everything that's been created to be legitimate, to not cause that scarring again?
Yeah, so I think the main thing that helped on the economic side, I'll refer to Oscar for the technology and the AI, but on the economic side, what you have is, instead of having these crazy 5-year, 6-year, 7-year ROIs on a purchase or on a product or an entire system that used to be for automation, you have these more adaptable, segmented products that can do a lot more and have a lot more flexibility with 18 months ROIs instead of 7-month ROIs. So there's a huge wave of like software as a service, hardware as a service, robotics as a service, that kind of just helps customers adopt this technology without having to fear of, you know, being basically washed away in a few years, because you can always adapt. You can always say, okay, I don't want it this month, I'll upgrade to something else the next month. On the AI side, I want what's more possible. I'll refer to Oscar because he's the
so I guess like something that was cool is that like a lot of these companies, especially like new AI companies, are releasing a lot of their software for free. So like self-driving car companies like Comma AI release like free software to completely like drive your car. Robotic companies like Fetch contributed to the development of the robot operating system. So like I, as a math student without like any real experience in AI, was able to make a robot that can like map its environment and like move around it. And because that's because like a lot of that stuff is already built. And it's like pretty easy to use. once it's implemented.
Would you say then, when it comes to developer communities, it's become a lot more open sourced?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a big wave that like, I don't know what it's like in production environment, but it's very easy to prototype because everything that you want like is free and open source. Okay.
Yeah, because that is one shift that I when I was in Italy, because they had the Arduino boards, the Arduino. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, pronunciations all over the place, but those boards, because with that technology and how it's open source, you can do so much with it.
Yeah,
and that blew my mind, because I was like, oh, this simple this simple thing right here, and you can do this, and then they have a whole category, and they actually teach you how to do everything, and they give you the steps to do it.
And it's cool because not only is the software open source, but the hardware is getting so cheap.
Yes,
it's like the off-the-shelf hardware is so much better than it used to be. Like, we're living in an age of like very cheap, very good hardware.
Yep.
And then free open source software that you can just pair up, and it's pretty amazing.
So would you say now is the time to get in this kind of space with AI and all these kinds of things, since it is becoming more open source? And
like now, and I think it's going to get easier and easier as we go into the future.
Yeah. Do you actually think that a lot of these really technical things are going to require less code?
So I think part of it is that they're going to require less code, but I think our code is just going to be better. Like it's not that like, so yeah, like it's cool to be able to do stuff without being able to program, but I think these things especially are going to become easier for people that know how to program very little.
Okay. So pretty much opening up more opportunities in space.
Well, there's a thing that's being developed by the National Institute of Standard of Technologies, NIST. What they're basically trying to do is make an infrastructure for coding.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Oscar, because you know about this better than I do. But they're trying to create an infrastructure for coding such that you can code in a visual diagram way. So you create basically the diagrams, and then the AI or the existing infrastructure takes your diagram and converts it into functional code.
Oh wow!
So that people without these crazy CS backgrounds can come in and develop stuff. Without having that rigorous training from a university, which I think for me is like amazing, because if you think of systems, or I think most people think visually.
Yeah.
Right. So to be able to create code visually, that's a huge step up for the entire human race. To be honest,
it is. I mean, that's also where web development is going, because they're creating web development systems that you draw it, and then it turns it directly into HTML code and JavaScript and everything you need just from drawing it. And for me, that's beautiful, because I know how to code, but like not to the extent that I can call myself a full stack developer.
Yeah.
But I at least know the processes I need to do. Majority of the stuff I do, I leverage other code, or I leverage other people that have done it before, so that I don't have to really worry about it too much. But to kind of go off of coding and the development, so I know that you are currently working on a project around this area. So can you tell me a little bit about, not necessarily coding, but mathematics in general?
So to go back to what Xavier said real quick, like some of the people working on this like intuitive robotic programming are mathematicians at NIST that work on category theory.
Okay.
So category theory is a field of math that like in its most general state just studies like processes and transformations between them. And so I've been working on a research project recently studying like a category where you study data sets and the machine learning algorithms between them. I'm not really sure what I told you before or what you'd like me to say now, but like, so something I'm seeing recently is, so like in the programming world, people look up to something called the semantic web, which is just like an idea of like the internet that really understands what you're talking about. And it turns out that like when people study the semantics of programming languages and computer programs, like these really abstract fields like category theory and type theory come up, which is just like super general field of study about like what things are, and it's almost like metaphysical.
Yeah.
So like I think it's really fascinating that people talk about like just like what a program does, which like you would think would require code, but you understand it by like super abstract math that like you don't learn like in college, even like math majors. So this like foundational math is teaching us about like how systems in like the practical world like operate with each other.
Okay. And one of the big reasons why that's important, how it dribbles down to engineering, is because category theory is fairly new.
Yeah.
As a study, but what it's basically doing is creating a new infrastructure for thinking about a lot of the problems that the math community faces.
Yeah.
In such a way that it becomes more accessible to tackle them in different ways. So because of you have category theory, you're now able to do this intuitive programming through, diagrams. Whereas before, you didn't have that framework to go off of. So the cool part about category theory, in my opinion, is the infrastructure that's creating for these new possibilities. And for me, it's in engineering and industry, but also in just pure math.
Yeah. So would you say that there's a lot of new developments in math that will slowly come to life because not only just what you're doing, but other research that's being done in the mathematics field? Because a lot of times when you talk to like an everyday person, right, they hear what math is and they think that math is absolute and this is what exists. So what I'm kind of getting at is, would you say that there's a lot of things that still need to be redefined because they've been defined prior, but maybe not in the right way?
Yeah, and it's already coming play into industry. Like there's not many applied category theorists.
Yeah.
There's like one big group with like Dr. John Bays at the university here in Riverside at UCR, and then there's another one at MIT. But like, there's like few research groups, but there's already like a lot of startups that like are applied category theory startups, and there's like venture funds for applied category theory. And the big product that comes to mind is one called the categorical query language by Connexus AI, which is like a functional categorical way of operating with databases. That's backed up by a lot of the category theory work that goes into reasoning about databases. Because there's like very simple problems with databases. Like if you try to look at something, but then you change your mind about what you wanted to see, like you can't just change what you requested. Like you have to start completely from scratch again. Like which is like lame. But like we're able to study like some of the properties of these problems with category theory and use them with the categorical query language, which is like a different way of operating with databases.
I think that's actually really important because now that, especially with data growth in general and the amount of data storage that every company has to have, and to make that into business intelligence, you need really smart systems that can actually pull that and actually query it in and then get you the outputs that you want. And I think that's actually a really good point that you brought up, is when you query one time, you can't just change your mind about it. And I think that's a big problem with like dashboard systems as well, because when you pull the information to create that dashboard to show the data that you want, you can't just I'm gonna change it up right now. So I think that's definitely a good approach that you're doing. I think it's gonna solve a lot of problems. So that's awesome to hear that somebody's researching stuff that is too technical for me. Awesome. So kind of gearing back into not necessarily just even the supply chain world, but robotics and artificial intelligence as a whole
let's
view,
do it.
is I know you want to do more than just supply chain AI. I know you eventually want to get into, bigger things, such like space. So what is this thing when it comes to space and the space exploration, as it's becoming now and more with SpaceX and all these different programs?
Yeah.
What do you think the opportunities come from space travel?
Yeah, so let me start off by unpacking the entire introduction to that question. I can't speak for the group. I initially got into entrepreneurship because I was in love with the tech, and my big thing was like, I want to make more money to build this tech that I think could impact people's lives more.
Yeah.
The first thing for me was, all right, just getting, I'm into harvesting resources and taking those resources from point A to point B.
Yep.
That for me, that's my thing. Like that's what I dream about. That's what I like.
Wild dreams,
I love talking to people about. It's just harvesting. How do we harvest resources and take them from point A to point B?
Yeah.
That's my shtick. And right now the logistics industry is like prime for doing exactly that.
Yeah.
It's the low hanging fruit because it's so technology starved that having the technology framework to just harvest the packages or the orders and taking them from point A to point B, from where it is initially to the endpoint to the customer, and getting it done in a fast and easy way. It's like the perfect testing ground for a bigger version of harvesting and transportation. But I initially got into this venture from my passion in asteroid mining.
Okay.
So,
what is asteroid mining?
Yeah. I came across it one time in summer after my sophomore year in college at UCR. I got kicked out of school. Low GPA. I went from like a 3.8 GPA to a 2.6 and then a 0.0 quarterly. I just got tired of school. I took too much to chew on, and I chewed more than I could take.
Yeah.
And I got kicked out. And I was like, part of me was very relieved because I didn't want to do college in the first place.
Yeah.
And then in that relief, I realized I had $126 in my bank account. I had to pay rent soon. I still hadn't told my parents, you know, I got kicked out of college. And so the question was like, what the hell do I do next? You know, I'm 19. I got to do something with my life. And asteroid mining somehow popped up. And it just never left after that. It popped up in an article, and then I kept reading on it more. And by the end of the week, I was like, all right, I have to go back and get my engineering degree. Like, I have to be part of this asteroid mining thing. So asteroid mining is basically the harvesting of resources from the asteroid belt or asteroids in space, and obtaining those resources and using them in a way that helps the human race expand into a better civilization.
Yep.
So just a little quick kind of thing I like to say about asteroid mining all the time to explain it to people is the reason why it's important is because even one asteroid, you know, it has water, platinum, nickel, all these valuable resources. But the biggest asteroid in the asteroid belt series has so much water that if you run all that water down Niagara Falls runs dry right now if it had started running when the Egyptian pyramids were built. Wow. So that's how much water the biggest asteroid in the asteroid belt has. And that's important because, you know, obviously water is a scarce resource and we have a growing population. Yep. But also, a lot of people don't know this, water breaks up into rocket fuel. Yep. Water is H2O, hydrogen, and oxygen. And rocket fuel today is made up of mostly liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. Yep. LOX and LH2. And so what it basically opens up is the ability to have basically space gas stations to help us conquer and like colonize more of space while we're up there. And the reason why the rocket fuel thing is important is because we actually use most of the rocket fuel from the point we leave Earth to the point we get to space. Once we get to space, there's no friction. So, you know, you use little rocket fuel to get from point A to point B. Yeah. But most of our rocket fuel is already used up by the time we get to space. So if we can refuel once we're up there, that would be a huge boost for all of us. So I got into asteroid mining and I'm like, all right, well, I want to make robots that harvest resources and get them from point A to point B in space, whether it is to Mars, the moon, Earth, whatever it is. And then I'm like, all right, well, I got to start somewhere. That's a $1 billion buy-in. I'm not going to get in it right after college. So I started with, you know, the simplest thing I could think of, which was taking objects from my 3D printer and putting them in a box or dropping them off somewhere. And that later turned into getting a box in a warehouse and taking it from point A to point B to just taking the box from point A to point B. Yeah. And that's where we are now.
Okay. So that's a
mouthful.
It's a mouthful.
I have a question about that. So I understand like why you would want like natural resources that you could find on asteroids, but why are you so motivated to like explore space?
I think it's, and I don't want to say I'm hijacking Elon Musk's vision, but I think part of it is twofold. It's like 40% guilt and 60% adventure. It's 40% guilt because I feel like not only my generation, but me myself am in a place where I can create difference that needs to be created. We're running out of resources on Earth. There's an overpopulation happening. But while we're on Earth, we're in a closed system, right? We don't take resources out of Earth to use, and we don't give resources out to space from Earth. And in any closed system, you kind of have more entropy and more, I guess, opportunity for chaos. And part of that guilt is thinking, and this goes from a quote from a Spider-Man movie, the last one, when Tony asks Peter Parker, you know, what gets you out of that twin bed in the morning? And Peter Parker replies, you know, when bad things happen and you can't do anything about it, it just sucks. That's the way the world works. Yep. But when bad things happen and you could have done something about it, you know, that eats you up. That's on you. And so I think part of it, the 40% is guilt, because I feel like I can do something about it, and I do fear that, you know, as a human race, we're in danger of extinction just because we can't leave Earth right now. And I feel like for whatever reason, I am one of the few people that can do something about it because of my upbringing, my privilege, my background. But 60% of it is actually just sheer adventure. And this goes back to what Elon Musk and Bezos say is like the wanting to explore and colonize. I think it's just so innate in human nature. It's just getting out there and facing the unknown, and you don't know what's gonna happen. You might die, but that's the whole point. That's the
experience.
That's the experience. You want that risk. It's what makes you feel alive, I would say, and that's what makes me feel alive.
Okay. And I think that's actually really, really important. Is whatever you want to pursue in life, it needs to do that. It needs to do exactly that thing, which is what gets you like going, like what gets you really, really like interested. Because like for me, like space has always been one of those fascinating things that I've always wanted to venture into it. However, I do not want to be the first one that goes on like for example like Virgin Airlines, like because they're creating that one that goes right on the top.
Spaceship One.
I will not go on that first one. I will not go on the second one. I will not go on the third one. I'll go on Space Ride 50 because that needs to get tested and proven before I go on anything that goes up into space and I can die in 2 seconds.
That's 100%. I think Elon Musk came out one time saying, he got interviewed saying, would you go to Mars? Would you be one of the first people on Mars? And initially he said yes in one of the interviews, but I think since then he's changed his mind. He's like, no. I'm run my company instead. It's way too dangerous.
Yeah, there's those that are willing to be those thrill seekers to be on that first one to say that they were on the first rides. I think that's insanity.
And we need them. We need them.
100% we do, but I consider that insanity because you just do not know
insanity.
what is going to happen. Exactly. But it is a very fascinating space, and I think that a lot of what you just talked about, like asteroid mining, it's gonna become more of a conversation as scarcity becomes a reality. We have limited resources and all these kinds of things. Because just what you just talked about, water, nickel, like these resources that you can get through asteroids are what are used for our infrastructure growth here in the world.
Not only that, but it's becoming more accessible. So we have the 5G race happening right now, which depends on the Skynet of multiple satellites in space, allowing for better broadband service. And because of that race, you're gonna have more ships leaving from Earth to space to put these satellites in orbit, making transportation from Earth to orbit a lot cheaper and more affordable for smaller companies to take part of. And we're seeing that shift right now. So, by the time we hopefully succeed, or even if we fail, we're gonna have a better chance of pursuing something in that direction in a few years.
What do you think about space waste then? So we're talking about launching a bunch of stuff into space. There is a big problem with having a lot of stuff in space because collisions and all that kind of stuff. So what do you guys think about space waste? Because that is a conversation that's now becoming a really big thing. Like there was a startup that I heard pitch that had a system to really cheaply create a parachute system that actually gets a rocket to a certain point in the ozone layer, and then it can propel the rest of it, and it makes it like dirt cheap to get rockets into space.
Nice.
Cool concept. But one of the VCs that heard that pitch was like, "What about space waste?"
Yeah,
I think that's a really good conversation to have. Is who's regulating this stuff and what is going to happen with the space waste? So what do you guys think about that?
I'll let you lead this one because I have mouthfuls to come.
Well, I guess my first question is like, what do we do with like the oceans?
That's true.
Like I would probably want to do something similar, but it seems that like they don't have it figured out yet either.
They don't.
And we've had oceans for a long time.
Yeah, I'm with Oscar on this one. I think it's something that's being talked about a lot, but I don't think there's a lot of economic incentive for it. Space is big. Other than the waste that runs around orbit is going super, super fast. Yep. So even if it's really small, it can damage a lot of the functional satellites up there, whatever it is. But I think it's something that comes up in conversation that isn't going to be really addressed because I don't think there's a huge need for it right now.
Would you say then human behavior is way more reactive than proactive? I personally think that.
100%, yeah. 100%.
Because once we create the problem, then we find the solution for it. Not necessarily we figure out what the problems will be. And then
100%. 100%.
But do you think there's anything that can be done about space waste? Like, do you think that there's any approach that could be taken to minimize it at least?
So I'm gonna sound villainous, and I'm gonna say I don't think anything should be done right now.
Okay.
I think it might slow down colonization. What I'm more afraid of, anything is just like legislation passing saying you can't send anything to space unless you get rid of your waste. That's gonna slow down
innovation, everything.
Yeah, innovation. And space waste isn't really affecting, organisms on the planet, or at least that I know of. It's not as big as greenhouse gases and pollution and all that. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I would go one step further and say we shouldn't bother with space travel until we fix the oceans.
Yeah.
So we're on opposite then.
No, I think that's a fair point. We have a lot of problems, and I think that actually came with the problem. And for example, that's why a lot of Jeff Bezos and all these guys, Elon Musk, get a lot of pushback. It's like, you're trying to colonize Mars. How about we fix our own planet here? Like, we're ignoring the resources that we're just dumping into like our own planet and destroying it slowly.
But they don't care. That's their resources. Like that's their companies. They get to do whatever they want. On their side though, I'm more of a proponent of their side. I think you can fix a lot more problems with what you learn from going to space.
Yeah.
A lot of the same way that you learn a lot, and I'm not a proponent of war, but a lot of innovation comes from this military industrial complex. So
it does.
I think there's obviously drawbacks, but there's also benefits that a lot of people ignore.
I think there's a lot of gray areas. Like there's just people talk in absolutes, which really bothers me because there's no absolutes in any industry, any problem, anything. There's no such thing as an absolute. So you look at, like, for example,
except math,
which you're redefined anyway, so we're good on that. But it gets interesting because if you really think about the gray areas in like industry, for example, like we have the concept of capitalism, so a company needs to make profits. Obviously, they're trying to be corporate social responsibility, they're trying to give back to society and make sure that they're not polluting and all these kinds of things. But at the end of the day, the gray zone really comes from like, well, they need to make profits, otherwise they can't employ people, and then like it goes trickle down. So you got to really think about the economics of stuff, and that was actually a huge conversation when it comes to geopolitical issues. Because for example, in the United States, natural gas, we have a lot of natural gas that can be created. It's actually not very well known that the Russian government actually was supporting that, because that they wanted us to lower our oil reserves to actually get more control and more power. It's a geopolitical game. So when you hear it on the news about like, yes, there's a lot of the Congress, for example, should push more legislation to support, obviously, sustainability and renewable energies and all these kinds of things. But you don't really think about those things. Like there's political tensions that still happen outside that get away from that gray zone area, that like it makes it so complicated that an everyday citizen just hearing on the news, you just think you know the whole story, but you might know 1% of everything else.
It's like the Game of Thrones episode where by taking part of this war to help humanity out, you're kind of exposing yourself to a weakness of getting overtaken by the competitor. And that's true. I didn't think of that.
So you always got to think of what are the external pieces, and that really comes from the world is very the earth is very complicated. Like we have different countries that want different things. Like there's a lot of pieces. But tying that back into obviously your guys' mission for ARKS is, I mean, what I see you guys really doing is you're really trying to make things more efficient and simple and help like push things forward. I think you guys, what you really are trying to do is you're trying to create more progress and innovation. You're trying to enable it.
Yeah, and we're in a really good time period right now because this automation wave is coming, and like you said, it's going to be displacing a lot of jobs. Unfortunately, a lot of automation companies kind of go out of the way to hide it and avoid the topic, but the truth is, like, a lot of the jobs that we're displacing, like, those jobs are not going to get trained to take on the new jobs of the next generation. It's really hard to displace a truck driver and tell him to learn how to code right after to take this other job that is now available because of technology, right? It's not that the same people that are getting displaced are not the same people that are going to be ready for the next wave of jobs. And we have to be aware of those drawbacks. That being said, automation right now is kind of opening up an opportunity for the human race to kind of elevate itself. What we want to do is displace tasks that we think are not worthy of human time anymore. Right? There's a lot of jobs that are crafts and art, and it's very important, and it's very understandable why people take pride in it. But there's also tasks within jobs that are very robotic in nature and unsafe, and honestly just sucks your soul away. And one of those we think is transporting things. Like, people shouldn't be transporting things from point A to point B.
You don't have to pick up a box in a warehouse and walk it all the way to the front
and just doing that over and over again for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. It's just like getting boxes is soul sucking. So we think we're in a really good opportunity right now as a human race to kind of elevate our expectations for what our professional roles can and should be. And that requires a little bit of disruption, but it's much more of an opportunity for us to kind of actually take steps towards progress, in my opinion.
Okay.
But there's obviously a lot of drawbacks to that. Like I think a lot of people, what they don't talk about, which it would be nice to talk about in the podcast right now, is like what challenges are actually going to be placed on, everyday people at the end of the day. And that's something people don't talk about. I don't know why, for whatever reason, but it's things that we need to start talking about because it's about to come.
Yep.
Like I think I read that the last recession we hit there was like a 26% of job loss or something, or 16%.
It's really high.
But compared to like the jobs that can be completely automated right
way
now.
Bigger. It's right now it would make up 60% of our economy. The jobs can get replaced by AI.
Yeah.
60%. If you really put that number down, that means that.
And that comes from like McKinsey and like all these other people that, seem to know what they're talking about.
Hopefully they know what they're talking about. But that means 3 out of 5 workers gone, because the biggest thing is the areas that so to an extent warehouse workers, to an extent manufacturing companies. Manufacturing is bigger than obviously any kind of warehousing.
Yeah.
Manufacturing is huge because robotics can do it way better. It's a routine task.
Yeah.
Retail stores massive, and that makes most of employment.
Right.
So you're shutting down retail centers like shopping malls and stuff like that.
And then transportation.
And then trucking. Massive. And if you really break down the numbers, and I think that's why like Andrew Yang he's good at what he's talking, and it's good that he's at least like, I don't
starting
know.
The conversation.
Exactly. I don't think he's going to win presidential candidacy, whatever. But at least he's starting the conversation that people understand what's really going on with technology. Because I see a lot of people that are just, I don't know what it is. They just deny the facts. They just completely ignore that this is going to happen.
Because it's convenient. You don't want to think about it.
It is scary.
Yeah,
like it's scary to really think about like what kind of jobs. So going back to, you're a very technical person. So what kind of jobs would you say are hard to automate?
Oh man.
Because I have a couple examples, but I want to hear what you would think would be kind of hard to automate.
A lot of blue collar
is definitely hard to automate.
Blue collar is hard to automate?
Yeah.
Like what?
Like plumbing, electricians,
any kind of
welders.
Yeah, any kind of direct craft like that.
Because it's complex.
And they pay well.
Craft.
So it was actually funny because I've had a couple of my students ask me, what jobs would pay over $100,000 and what can I get a job in? I'm straight up like plumbing. like just do plumbing. You can get so much money off of it. Obviously that's not a sexy job. Like I'm a plumber.
No, it's needed.
But it's needed and it's necessary, and AI
important.
can never do it because it's not a routine task, and AI cannot go into your house and actually go into the areas and figure out exactly what the needs are and craft the exact personalization that you need to fix that problem.
Yeah.
They can fix like certain areas. They can be very good at it if you have a micro problem and they can fix it. But that's what I think AI, like if you really think about AI and what it can and cannot do, it cannot replace that.
Yeah. Sure. Pattern recognition.
But I think people thought something sort of similar about like carpentry and building houses. But now we're able to like 3D print. Like,
I know, that's actually crazy.
Yeah, got us there.
that is a good point. And I think that's a good point is that there's areas like plumbing. Like for example, I'm not thinking of ways that AI could do it. But you bring up a good point. 3D printing. And that tied in with AI, complementary technologies, I would say.
That was unexpected though, is that AI can, like a lot of white collar jobs, it's just pattern recognition and analysis. And AI just blows us out of the water in that. Like, there's no way we can ever compete with an AI on pattern recognition.
No. So for example, data analysts will lose a lot of value, but the strategists will gain a lot of value.
Yeah.
Because the person that's creating the thought process behind a system or creating what is new or how to use that data or how to do those things, they will always have the control. AI cannot do what they do. They can give them reasoning, but they don't have human instinct to think of like certain things or a thing called gut feeling and stuff like that.
Yeah. Dun, dun, dun. Nice.
Honestly, we don't know. Like where AI can go, like it's advanced so much because AI's existed. Wasn't it since like the late 80s? It's like the concept at least has been like
yeah, I mean like we've been working on this kind of stuff for a long time.
Yeah.
Like in the 80s, I think we already had research teams building like self-driving cars, for example.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. But it's obviously just inefficient because it was extremely expensive and all these things. But now that with big data,
the infrastructure.
The infrastructure's there.
Yeah.
So I guess another question aside from like who do you think would have a job? What do you think that 5G complementing with AI is going to be able to do?
Oh, that's a tough question.
Because I think that's going to open a lot of doors.
Yeah, so like a big thing right now in that space is something called Edge AI.
Okay.
Which is like the normal AI is that like you use a really big computer on the cloud to like train your machine learning model and then you use it. But the idea behind Edge AI is that like if we get strong computers that are really small, like we're seeing with the IoT movement, then we're going to be able to do a lot of this like AI like directly on the board now.
Oh wow.
Right. So like Tesla's cars, I think for the most part use a trained model that they train on the cloud, but the processing that they do is like on the car, right? Because you don't want a car going like 60 miles an hour, having to talk to like their cloud like
back and
like
forth,
10 times a second to see what to do. So like I think we're seeing a lot of like trained models like just doing their thing on premises, and like the better that like 5G gets, the better that communication and processing gets, the more that we're gonna be seeing like happening on premises,
on-site processing,
on real time.
Yeah.
So do you think that's gonna obviously like enable legitimate automation in driving?
Yeah, like I think a lot of vision things especially are gonna like just become a lot more accessible, and I think we're gonna see a lot more things that have like computer vision just like built in.
I'll say it's actually a prerequisite for level 3 autonomous vehicles, or I guess
What's level 3?
I'm just what's called repeating things I've heard from the my heroes.
What would the levels be when it comes to autonomous?
So I think level 3 is complete, or is that level 5?
I think it's 5.
I think
level 5. You're right. Level 5 is complete autonomous.
Yeah.
Level 2, I think, is what Comma AI is doing now, where it's you're taking what already exists in the car, which is lane keeping assist, coupled with
like cruise control.
Yeah, that's level 2. And then level 3 is I think maybe lane changing. I don't know. I get lost there, but I heard that to even reach level 5, you really need that 5G infrastructure to have the cars, process on site, because you can't have that many autonomous vehicles talk to the cloud all at the same time and expect to not have any lag time that can create some consequences. But I don't know. I don't have a background in that. I'm just repeating things that I've heard.
Yeah.
I don't understand it deeply enough to have an actual opinion.
Yeah.
Going back a sec, like what kind of jobs do you want to exist for a long time?
Well, like, I mean, going back to the point, like routine tasks, like I just think those should be automated in the first place. And unfortunately, like I'm saying that, like it's displacing a lot of jobs. But I really do think that, because it's just efficiencies is one thing that it'll become. That's a question of how much raw materials are going to be used in that efficiencies. Like that's another question that needs to be answered later down the line, and I'm not the right person to answer that question. But I guess the jobs that I hope never do get replaced are things that actually are the pieces that impact society itself. So the decision makers that are actually making those decisions to impact society. If an AI is making the decision for like a CEO of a company to push the company in a certain way, that is what kind of worries me a little bit, is the decision makers and companies, managers and all that kind of stuff. I hope that never gets replaced by AI, because it's not going to have the human emotion tied into it to an extent. Like human emotion does cause problems.
Yeah, it does.
Don't get me wrong. Like human emotion does cause greed and like all these Ponzi schemes and all these problems that happen in society. Yeah. But at the same time, if you really think about it, if humans are not the ones making the final decision, how are they really thinking about it as the emotional intelligence? How does it connect to empathy? How does it connect to those things? So my whole thing when it comes to AI is going to replace as many jobs as it will. It'll replace lawyers. It'll replace like lawyers to an extent. Like it can read a law book and it can make a case.
It can make discovery.
Because it work 24/7, for example, and it's gonna make lawyers lose a lot of their value. It's gonna make doctors lose a lot of their value. But what I really hope is that, for example, society still values them what they should be valued for. Doctors should be paid for their training and all that kind of stuff. Even if AI is supporting them as a tool, they should not lose their value, because in society it's so important to have doctors. Like we need to have these medical professionals and all these things. So what I really hope is that it displaces the really routine stuff, but even some of the things that it could technically replace, I hope it's more used as a tool, not necessarily as a whole replacement. Because I don't want a robot do my knee surgery, like fully, like to an extent. Like I want the robot to assist in the process, but it's just, for me, it feels weird that a robot is going into my knee.
But that might be just our own cultural bias.
It might be.
In the same way that people don't feel safe having a self-driving vehicle
now, as of right now.
Yeah, just drive them without a driver. So I think Waymo, it was like people were like uncomfortable with just being on the self-driving vehicle without a driver on board, even though it was safer than having a driver on board. Yeah. So they literally just added
it's just minimal control.
Yeah.
That's people want control. They want control of, if I'm gonna die, I want it to be because of my own terms, not because a car had a malfunction and then it crashed into a wall. Like I get that's where the scariness comes from, and that's where like Black Mirror has become such a good show, because it scares the crap out of people. It shows like what technology really can do if it's done the wrong way.
But we might, like, the next generation might be completely comfortable with it. You never know. We might be the old geezers saying, "Oh, like robots.
No, that's very true. All right. Well, to kind of close out the show, I think the final piece that I really want to hear from both of you guys is anybody that wants to venture into making an autonomous product, service, or whatever, and they're trying to get into this space as an entrepreneur. What is your advice to them trying to get into this space? What is the advice for somebody trying to make a tech startup, or especially something that's using AI? What would your advice be?
Oscar, you want to go for it, or should I go for it?
Okay.
I want to hear both of your guys' opinions on this.
Yeah,
but
no, but
okay, I'll give a crude one first.
Okay.
So I guess like if you want to start a business, like especially like in the like autonomous tech space, like make sure it's a business.
Yes.
So I think like you can start learning about technology on the side, but I think like one of the best things that you can do is like start talking to like the Small Business Development Center or like other organizations that are there to help you start your businesses.
Or actual customers.
Yeah, because there's like a lot of organizations or just people that are paid or have some vested interest in helping you, and you should take as much help as you can get before you start building something. Just like make sure someone needs it.
I think that's definitely huge. A lot of technology and a lot of products are made because it's cool.
Yeah.
I personally want it, but it doesn't mean the market wants it. And if you can't convert that into sales, you're not making money and you have no business. So.
Which isn't a bad motivation to start, but you definitely have to take the leap at some point and say, yeah, we're gonna do an actual business instead of just hobby technology.
Exactly. So what would your advice be then?
So I think the customer development process is super important. Discover your customers. Try to get someone to say they need it and they'll buy it before you even start developing it, especially if there's hardware involved. But I would say that the two biggest things that I learned in my first year as an entrepreneur this year was find a problem that exists today that didn't exist back then. So for us, it's this shift in e-commerce versus labor. There's more e-commerce booming now than ever before, and it has only just outpaced how much labor can handle. So pick a problem that only exists right now in a macro trend, and then decompose that into a very specific problem for someone. And then the second thing would be to just use the existing infrastructure. Don't reinvent the wheels. And what that means is basically like if you can buy something and tweak it a little bit and add a little value added to the thing and then resell it for a much larger price, do that. Don't try to develop the entire product. Just add on to existing stuff and sell it. And I would say sell first before you make it. Because you don't actually know what you're gonna need to make until you actually sell it.
Yeah. And then one more small thing I'll tack on is like follow a mixed strategy and like keep doing a little bit of everything. So in the beginning, it's really important to focus a lot on your customer. But I think like even then you should start like following technologies to see what's possible. And then once you're mostly building the product, like keep interviewing customers to make sure they still need it. So just like keep up with everything.
A lot of feedback.
It's
which is harder than it sounds. But just kind of like on that too. Just I think the last advice I can give on that is 0 to 1 is probably one of my favorite books for starting.
I love that book.
A startup in general. Innovator's Dilemma if you're gonna do a tech startup. And at the end of the day, what I think really, cuts into whether or not what you can do is there's some problems that are too big for one person to do. Not that I don't believe solopreneurs aren't a thing. I think there's a lot of problems that you can tackle as a solopreneur. But even if you're a solopreneur, you still need to find a team that can help you build your. So definitely pick the right people that you can get along with that, will push you to build a better company and that share a similar set of values and mission statement that you do. I think that's actually the most important thing. Well, that's the thing I consider the most important in starting any venture. It's just building the right team.
No, I think that's perfect advice. I could not say that any better. But overall, that was a great conversation. We talked about a lot of technical stuff and non-technical stuff. But
thank you for having us.
I appreciate both of you being on the show, and that's a wrap for the Brew.
Thanks, Val.